The apron landed on her face. It was a catering apron, the heavy canvas kind, stained with something that had been there long enough to be permanent, smelling of cooking grease and the specific institutional smell of food service equipment that has been used and imperfectly cleaned many times. It hit her face and fell to the marble floor of the Cathedral of St. Meredith in a crumpled heap, and the silence that followed its landing was the silence of 312 people in their finest clothes, holding their collective breath while they processed what they had just witnessed. What they had witnessed was this: Margaret Ashmore, 67 years old, heir to the Ashmore real estate fortune, and the woman who would have been Elena's mother-in-law in approximately 40 minutes, had crossed the cathedral's nave to where Elena was standing near the altar steps in her wedding dress, had snapped her fingers at the catering supervisor who was standing near the door to the service corridor, and when the supervisor had handed her the apron with the stunned compliance of a professional who is operating in a situation that has exceeded his available protocols, she had thrown it. She had thrown it at Elena's face with the specific, deliberate accuracy of a woman who has been waiting for this moment and has arrived at it with complete conviction. "The buffet staff quit," Margaret said, her voice carried to the back of the cathedral with the ease of a woman who has been speaking in large rooms her entire adult life and has never needed to raise her voice to be heard. "Something about the contract. You look like you know how to work, Elena. Pick it up. Earn your place before you presume to stand at my son's altar." The 312 guests, the financial elite of 4 states, the board members and managing directors and heirs apparent and trophy wives, each one dressed to a standard that had made the morning's dressing rituals a serious professional undertaking, looked at the apron on the cathedral floor. Then they looked at Elena. Then they looked at Margaret, who was standing with her hands clasped in front of her Chanel suit in the specific, self-satisfied posture of a woman who has executed a plan and finds the execution exactly as satisfying as she anticipated. Then they looked at the man standing at the altar. Carter Ashmore, 34 years old, heir to Ashmore Properties, the man Elena had been engaged to for 11 months, the man who had proposed in a garden in Connecticut on an evening she had believed contained something real. Carter was looking at the floor. He was looking at the apron on the marble floor with the expression of a man who is deciding something, and the decision he was making was visible in the quality of his looking. And the decision was, not this time, not yet, not while the deal was still pending. He looked up. He caught Elena's eyes. He made a small, compressed gesture, the slight downward tilt of his head, the almost imperceptible movement that said, "Not here, not now. Please just do this thing, just this one thing. We'll talk about it later." What would you do if this were you? If you were standing at the altar of a cathedral in your wedding dress while your future mother-in-law threw a dirty apron at your face and told you to earn your place before you married her son, and 247 people who were dressed the way money dresses when it wants to remind itself what it is were watching to see what you would do? What would you do if the man who said he loved you was looking at the floor? Elena reached down. She picked up the apron. She untied the strings, which were knotted from previous use, with the patient, methodical attention of someone performing a task rather than responding to a provocation. She tied it around her waist. She smoothed the front of it over the skirt of her wedding dress, and then she went very still. Not the stillness of someone who has given up, the stillness of someone who has made a calculation and arrived at a number, and the number is 12 minutes. Because what Margaret Ashmore did not know, what no one in this cathedral knew, except the woman in the wedding dress with the dirty apron tied over it, was that there were, at this moment, 28 military vehicles on the streets surrounding the Cathedral of St. Meredith, that the men inside them were in the formal dress of an imperial household guard that had been in continuous service for 308 years, that the man in the lead vehicle had been traveling for 19 hours to be here, not because he had been invited to a wedding, but because his granddaughter had sent a message that contained 4 words, and he had left within the hour of receiving them. The 12 minutes were the last 12 minutes of the world, as Margaret Ashmore had always understood it. Elena's real name was not Elena Costa. It was Alexandra Elena Vasilieva Kostova, and she was the granddaughter and sole direct heir of Emperor Vasil III of the Kostovian Empire, a sovereign nation in the Balkans and Central Europe that had governed itself as an imperial state through various configurations for 640 years, that had a population of 8 million, a military alliance with 4 neighboring nations, and a personal and dynastic wealth held by the imperial family that international financial analysts, when they attempted to quantify it, described as structurally resistant to conventional valuation, which was the language used when the number exceeded the category of numbers that conventional valuation was built to handle. She had left when she was 27. The leaving had been a negotiation. Everything in her life was a negotiation, because the imperial family made decisions by council, and her grandfather was the council's final voice, and his final voice required being heard before any action was possible. But the negotiation had been genuine, which meant it had been honest, and honesty was the currency she and her grandfather had always exchanged between them. She had said, "I need to know what I am when I am not this." He had said, "You are always this. That doesn't change." She had said, "I know, but I need to know what is underneath it. I need to know what is mine and not given to me by circumstance." He had looked at her for a long time. He was 78 and had governed for 41 years and had seen his daughter, her mother, die at 34 of something that medicine had not yet learned to stop, and had raised Alexandra himself in the specific, grave, enormous way of a man for whom raising a grandchild is simultaneously the most personal thing he has ever done and the most consequential institutional act of his reign. He had looked at her the way he looked at things he was deciding, with complete attention and no visible indication of the decision's direction until the decision was made. He said, "The emergency line. You carry it. You use it without pride if you need it." She said, "Yes." He said, "Irina checks in with you weekly." Irina was his private secretary, who had been with the family since before Alexandra was born, and who found discretion simply the natural condition of her existence rather than a professional skill. She said, "Yes." He said, "And you come back." She said, "I will come back." He had looked at her one more time. Then he had said, with the specific, quiet gravity of a man who understands that some decisions produce consequences that cannot be undone, and is making them anyway, because the alternative is worse. Go. She had become Elena Costa. She had a real qualification, a teaching certificate earned during a preparation period, in a city where she was not known, studying under a name that would not trigger recognition in anyone who was not specifically looking for her. And she found a position at a public middle school in New Haven, Connecticut, teaching 7th grade English literature. The work suited her in ways she had not fully anticipated. She had grown up surrounded by people for whom performance was the primary mode of interaction, and the classroom was the opposite of performance. It required presence. It required genuine attention to the specific, individual needs of 30 children who had not consented to being in a room together and needed to find, with her help, some reason to care about books. She was good at it. She was good at it the way she was good at everything she applied herself to, with the comprehensive, patient attention that was her fundamental mode of engagement with the world. She had lived in a small apartment in East Rock, on a street of old Victorian houses that had been subdivided into units over the decades, and she had learned in the first year what ordinary life felt like when ordinary life was all there was. The grocery run, the lesson planning, the coffee on Sunday mornings, with no obligation to appear anywhere by any time for any institutional purpose. She had found this extraordinary, not the smallness of it. She had not found it small. She had found it the opposite of small. She had found it enormous, in the way that things are enormous when they are entirely yours. She met Carter at a fundraiser for the school district. He was there as a donor's representative. Ashmore Properties had given a significant grant to a science program initiative, and he had come to present the check, which was the kind of thing he did because his mother had organized his charitable portfolio since he was in his mid-20s, and this was on the list. She was there as a teacher, representing the district's faculty at the donor event. He was at the drinks table. She was also at the drinks table. He said, without preamble, "Do you know anything about the science program they're describing?" She said, "Some. I teach English, so I know it obliquely." He said, "Is it as good as the presentation makes it sound?" She said, "The kids who participate in it are noticeably different in their ability to construct an argument. That's the only metric I have." He said, "That's a better metric than the one in the presentation." He said it with the specific quality of a man who is used to presentations that are designed to impress and who finds the alternative, an honest, particular observation, more interesting. She gave him her number at the end of the event. She had not intended to. She told herself she was being exploratory. She knew she was not being exploratory. He was attentive without performing attentiveness. This was the quality she had been testing for across the 18 months since she arrived in New Haven. Whether it was possible for a person to be genuinely present without the awareness of what her presence was worth. He was present in the way of someone who has found a particular thing interesting and is interested in it for its own sake, not for what it represented or what she represented or what the combination of the two of them represented to anyone observing. They dated for 14 months. She watched him in situations designed to reveal character, how he treated the waitstaff at restaurants with the automatic, unremarkable decency of someone for whom this is simply the baseline, how he handled being wrong, badly at first, then with the graceful revision of someone who respects the correction more than the original position, how he talked about money with the specific, slightly self-conscious quality of someone who has always had it and has developed a vocabulary around it that is designed not to make others uncomfortable, which is a different and more complicated quality than simply having money. She loved him. She arrived at this conclusion with the same methodical honesty she brought to all conclusions that mattered, by looking at the evidence, by naming what she saw, by refusing the versions of the evidence that would have been more comfortable than the accurate one. She loved him. The loving was real. She did not tell him who she was. She had the conversation mapped, knew its shape, knew the moment it needed to happen, held it ready for the point at which it became necessary. The point kept arriving, and she kept deciding it had not yet fully arrived, because the truth was large, and the telling of it would change everything, and she wanted more time in the thing before it changed. He proposed 11 months after they began. In a garden in Connecticut, at a house his parents owned. She had met his parents by then. The meeting had been what the meeting was. She had filed it and continued on an evening in late spring, when the light was the color that light goes when it is deciding to stop. He said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life learning how she thought about things, which was a proposal she had not expected in that specific form, and which was the kind of proposal that is the truest kind, specific, grounded in who the person actually is, rather than in the gesture of the proposing. She said yes. She meant it. She still had not told him. Margaret Ashmore. She had met Margaret at the first family dinner, the Greenwich House, which was the size of an institution and was decorated in the manner of a house that has never needed to be lived in, because its function is communicating what the family is, rather than sheltering what the family does. Margaret wore Chanel the way people wear identity, as the primary visible expression of the self, the thing that tells the room what category of person has arrived before the person does. She had the posture of a woman who had spent 67 years being the most consequential presence in any room, and had organized her relationship with gravity around this fact. She looked at Elena at the first dinner with the assessment expression from the moment she arrived, and the assessment concluded within approximately 4 minutes, and its conclusion was communicated not through statement, but through the specific, textured management of Elena's irrelevance. The questions asked about her work that framed teaching as occupation rather than vocation. The references to Carter's previous relationships that established the field in which Elena was operating as one. With serious competition, the specific warm attention directed at every other person at the table, and the specific, courteous absence of warmth directed at Elena. The months of the engagement were the months of the sustained, organized, sophisticated campaign that Margaret ran against Elena's presence in the family with the comprehensive energy of someone for whom the campaign is itself the primary activity, rather than a means to an end. It operated through selection: who was consulted, who was included, whose opinion was solicited in the planning of a wedding that Margaret had effectively taken over within a month of the engagement being announced. It operated through implication: the consistent, low-level suggestion that Elena's background, her family, no family, an orphan, which Elena had described herself as, because it was functionally accurate, and which Margaret used as a category designation that carried meaning she did not need to spell out. Her financial position and her professional status made her presence in the Ashmore family a matter of charity rather than alliance. There was the dinner in December where Margaret had introduced Elena to a group of family friends as Carter's project, which was a description that had a surface warmth. Projects are things you invest in, things you care about, and an interior that was the precise opposite of warmth. Elena had said, with the level voice she used for things that needed to be documented rather than reacted to. That's an interesting way to put it. Margaret had smiled. She had moved on. There was the engagement party in February, where Margaret had organized the seating so that Elena's place card was at a table with people who were connected to the family in service capacities: the accountant, the property manager, the family's long-standing contractor, which was either an accident of the kind that does not happen to a woman of Margaret's organizational precision, or a statement. Elena had sat at the table and had been genuinely interested in the people at it, which was consistent with her character and which, she understood, was probably not the response Margaret had anticipated. Carter had been present for some of these moments. His response had the consistency of someone who has been managing his mother's behavior his entire adult life and has developed a toolkit for the management that prioritizes containment over confrontation. He steered conversations. He changed subjects. He said to Elena afterward that his mother was difficult with everyone and that she needed time, and that this was a critical period for the company, and he needed things to be stable. He said this across several iterations with the specific, managed quality of a man who is using a phrase he has used before and will use again, because it is the phrase that buys him more time in a situation he is unwilling to resolve. Elena had given him the time. She had given it with the patience of someone who had been patient in much larger situations for much longer periods, and had understood that patience was not passivity, but the deliberate management of what was given and what was withheld. The wedding morning had produced the final evidence, which was the evidence she had been waiting for. Carter had come to her suite at the hotel where she was getting ready. She had not stayed at the Ashmore house the night before, having decided that some distances were worth maintaining, and he had said, with the managed, apologetic quality of a man who is about to say something he knows is wrong and has decided to say it anyway because the alternative is a conflict he is not ready to have. My mother has some ideas about the reception, about the arrangements. I need you to be flexible. She had looked at him. Flexible in what direction, she had said. He had said, she feels the catering is not up to the standard. She may want to make some changes at the last minute. Elena had said, Carter, what changes? He had said, just be flexible, please, for me. And he had left. She had understood then. She had not known the specific form it would take. The apron was more specific than she had anticipated, more theatrical, which was consistent with Margaret's sense of scale. But she had understood that what was coming was the final public statement of what the previous 11 months had been building toward, and that the statement was going to be made, and that Carter was not going to stop it. She had taken out the phone, the one she had carried for 3 years. She had typed 4 words to the contact labeled only with the initial V, which was not a deception because it was not a name, but a designation, the first letter of a title rather than a letter of a name. She had sent, "Come now, St. Meredith's," and she had gone to the cathedral, and the apron had landed on her face. And now she was standing at the altar steps in her wedding dress, with a canvas apron tied over it, and she was 12 minutes from the end of the world, as Margaret Ashmore had always understood it. The cathedral's sound reached her first in the form of its absence. The ambient sound of a full space, the breathing and the rustling, and the low, contained human sound of 300 people gathered in expectation, went quiet in the specific way that a large group's ambient sound goes quiet when the group simultaneously receives an input that overrides every other sensory priority. Then the sound arrived, not from inside, from outside. Multiple, large, coordinated. The sound of vehicles in number moving through the streets around the cathedral in the specific, deliberate quality of a convoy that has reached its destination and is completing its approach with the unhurried precision of people who have done this many times. Then the cathedral doors, both of them, the large wooden doors at the end of the nave, old oak, set in stone, designed to be imposing and succeeding at it, opened simultaneously from the outside with the force of 8 hands, 4 on each door, pushing with the coordinated efficiency of people who open doors for a living and know how to open them completely. The light from the street came in first, then the soldiers. They were in the formal dress of the Kostovian Imperial Household Guard, deep red with gold braid at the shoulder and the wrist, the Imperial Eagle in gold at the breast, white gloves, ceremonial sabers at the belt. They moved into the cathedral in 2 columns of 14, taking positions along the walls of the nave with the coordinated precision of a formation that had been rehearsing this function since each of them entered service. The nave was secured in 40 seconds. 28 armed members of an Imperial Household Guard, formally dressed, in position along the walls of a wedding cathedral in Connecticut, and every one of the 312 guests in the pews was entirely still. Then he came. Emperor Vasil III of the Kostovian Empire was 81 years old. He had governed for 44 years. He had been born into the position and had grown into it in the specific way that people grow into things that are the right size for them, not by shrinking to fit, but by expanding to fill, by becoming more completely what the position required until the position and the person were the same thing. He was not a tall man. He had never needed to be. Height is one form of presence, and it is the least important form. What he had was the other kind, the specific, accumulated, irreversible quality of authority that has been lived for so long that it has become identical with the person exercising it, indistinguishable from their posture and their step and the specific, level direction of their gaze. He wore his civilian dress uniform, dark navy, gold-trimmed, with the orders of the Kostovian Empire at his chest. The decorations of 4.5 decades of statecraft and diplomatic alliance, arranged in the specific, significant grammar of a man who has earned them all and wears them because the occasion requires it. He carried a walking stick, which was not for vanity, but for the practical reality of 8 decades. He walked with it with the specific quality of someone for whom a walking stick has become an extension of their posture rather than a correction of it. He walked down the center aisle of the Cathedral of St. Meredith. He walked with the pace of someone who does not require the space to rearrange itself before he arrived, because the space rearranges itself in the fact of his presence without any additional action required. He walked past 312 people who had been dressed to impress each other and were now entirely unmoved from their pews by the specific paralysis of people who have encountered a category of event they do not have available cognitive resources to process. Margaret Ashmore, in the front left pew, had her hand on the edge of the pew in front of her. Her knuckles were white. Her face had the quality of a face that is attempting to maintain the structure of its usual expression, while the thing that generates the expression has been, quite suddenly, removed. Carter Ashmore was still at the altar. He had turned when the doors opened, and he was looking at the Emperor walking down the aisle of his wedding cathedral with the expression of a man who is watching something he is going to need the rest of his life to understand, and is beginning to understand in the first second of watching that the rest of his life is also going to look different from what he had planned for it. The Emperor walked to the altar steps. He stopped in front of his granddaughter. He looked at her. He looked at the wedding dress, the ivory silk with the full skirt and the bodice that she had chosen herself, that was hers. And he looked at the apron over it, the canvas catering apron, stained and crumpled, tied at her waist with the patient, careful knot she had made while 300 people walked. Something moved through his face, not anger. Anger was too simple and too temporary for what was in his face. Something older, something that had the quality of a decision made at the deepest level of a person, below the level of deliberation, in the place where the things that are absolute reside. He reached forward. His gloved hands, the white gloves of the imperial formal dress, found the apron strings. He untied them with the same patient, methodical attention with which she had tied them, and he lifted the apron from her waist, and he held it. Then he turned and handed it, without looking at who received it, to the aide who had positioned himself 2 steps behind and to the right. The aide took it. The Emperor did not watch where it went. He turned back to his granddaughter. He took her right hand in both of his. He bowed, not the social bow of a formal greeting, the specific, complete bow of a man performing an act of recognition that has a name in the grammar of imperial protocol. The bow that is made by a sovereign to someone whose standing exceeds or equals his own, which in this case was the bow of a grandfather to the woman who would be empress after him, the woman who was the continuation of everything he had built and governed and protected for 44 years. He kissed her hand. The cathedral was so silent that the sound of the kiss was audible in the back row. He straightened. He looked at her. He said in the language of the empire, which was the language she had spoken since before she could walk, "You waited long enough." She said in the same language, "You came quickly." He said, 4 words, "You think I would wait?" She almost smiled. It was the smallest possible smile, the smile of 2 people who know each other well enough that the smallest version of it carries the largest amount of what it means. "No," she said, "I knew you wouldn't." He turned. He turned to face the cathedral, to face the 312 people and the pews and the altar, and Carter Ashmore standing at it, and Margaret Ashmore in the front pew, and he stood beside his granddaughter, and the standing beside her was itself a statement of a kind that did not require translation into any language. Elena Alexandra looked at the room. She looked at Margaret first. Margaret, who had thrown an apron at her face in a cathedral in front of 300 people and called it "earning your place." Margaret, who had spent 11 months managing Elena's irrelevance with the specific, sustained, sophisticated cruelty of someone who has decided the cruelty is simply accuracy, simply the correct description of a situation. Margaret, whose face was doing something it had probably never done in 67 years of being Margaret Ashmore's face. It was becoming very small. She said in English clearly, without raising her voice, "My name is Princess Alexandra Elena Vasileva Kostova. I am the heir to the Kostovian imperial throne and the granddaughter of Emperor Vasil III, who is standing beside me." She let this sit for the moment it required. "I have been living under an assumed identity for 3 years because I needed to know whether the life I built was mine. It was mine, all of it. She looked at Carter, including the part that included you. Carter was looking at her with the expression of a man who is revising a great many things simultaneously and is finding the revisions slow and difficult. He said, "Alexandra, Elena," she said. "To you, I'm still Elena, because Elena is who you proposed to." She held his gaze for a moment. "And Elena is who you let stand here in a dirty apron because the conflict with your mother was more costly than my dignity." He opened his mouth. "I'm not going to marry you today," she said. "I am going to leave this cathedral with my grandfather." She paused. "There are some other things that are going to happen first." One of the imperial aides, the one who had taken the apron, not the one with the apron, a different aide, the one who carried the document portfolio, stepped forward. He opened the portfolio. He took out a document that had the weight and the crest of the Kostovian Imperial Legal Office at its head and presented it to a man who had positioned himself near the front of the nave in the civilian clothes of someone who had entered the cathedral with the Imperial Guard, but was not a member of it. The man took the document. He walked to Margaret's pew. "Mrs. Ashmore," the aide said in precise English, "the document being presented to you is a formal notice of the Kostovian Imperial Trade and Commerce Commission, which has jurisdiction over all commercial relationships between entities in its treaty territory and the companies listed on its commercial registry." He paused. "Ashmore Properties has been on the Kostovian Commercial Registry since 2019, when it entered a joint venture arrangement with the Kostovian Infrastructure Development Arm for a commercial project in the capital. The joint venture agreement contains a conduct clause." Another pause. "The Commission has determined that the conduct of the Ashmore family's senior representative, specifically the deliberate public humiliation of a member of the imperial family, constitutes a material breach of the conduct clause. The joint venture agreement is terminated, effective today. The termination triggers a clawback provision for all funds disbursed under the agreement over the past 4 years." Margaret said, "That is not the clawback amount," the aide said, with the clean, bloodless precision of someone delivering information rather than participating in a conversation, "is $47 million, recoverable within 90 days under the terms of the agreement." He closed the portfolio. "Additionally, the Commission has notified all 14 of the other companies in the treaty registry with whom Ashmore Properties maintains active commercial agreements of the conduct finding. Their individual responses will be their own business decision." One of the men in the pews, a man Elena recognized as the CEO of one of those 14 companies, who had been a wedding guest in the capacity of a business associate, took out his phone. He looked at it. He stood and walked quickly and quietly toward the exit. He was not the only one. Carter said, "Alexandra, this is not Elena," she said again. "I am Elena to you, Carter, until I leave this building." He looked at his mother. Margaret was holding the document with both hands. The document was heavy paper. The Kostovian imperial crest was gold at its head. She was holding it with the specific quality of someone holding a thing that contains information they cannot currently manage. "I want to tell you something," Elena said to Carter. "Not for you specifically, for this room, for everyone in it." She looked at the pews, at the 312 people who were now, collectively, understanding that the morning they had arrived for was not the morning they were in. "I came here, to New Haven, to this life, because I wanted to know whether I was someone who could be loved without the institution, without the title, without the weight of what I am when I am what I am." She paused. "I found the answer. The answer was yes. I was loved. I was genuinely chosen by a man who did not know what I was. And that is the most valuable thing the 3 years produced." She looked at Carter. "The answer was also that being loved is not the same as being protected, and I needed both." Carter looked at the floor. She looked at her grandfather. He was watching her with the expression she knew best from him, the expression of someone who is very proud of a person and is managing the pride because the context requires management. She had seen it at her graduation from the Imperial Academy. She had seen it at her mother's funeral when she had been 11 years old and had sat through the state ceremony without crying, which she had done because she had understood at 11 that some things were required by the position and she would do them, and then she would find somewhere private to cry. And her grandfather had seen her understand this in real time, and his face had made the expression. She had seen it in his library on the winter evening when she had told him she needed to leave, and he had listened to everything she said. He was making it now. She let herself see it clearly. She had earned the seeing of it. She looked at Margaret one final time. Margaret, who was holding the document. Margaret, whose face had become something she had probably not allowed it to be in decades. Simply a face, without the performance of authority animating it, without the certainty that she was the most consequential presence in the room. Elena said, "You threw an apron at my face in a house of worship." She said it simply, as a statement of fact, as a document. I want that to be the last thing I say to you, because it is the only thing that needs to be said. She paused. You have the document. Your lawyers will call the commission. The commission's lawyers will not be persuaded. She looked away. She was done looking at Margaret Ashmore. She turned to her grandfather. She offered her arm. He took it, not with the formal grip of a sovereign, with the grip of a man whose granddaughter has offered him her arm and who is going to hold it for as long as the walking lasts, because the holding of it is the thing. They walked down the aisle. The Imperial Guard fell into formation around them, not between them and the guests, not in a manner that was aggressive or threatening, simply present in the way that the Guard is always present, the living extension of what they were protecting. The guests in the pews were entirely still. The sound of the 312 people in the cathedral was the sound of an intake of breath, held longer than breath is usually held. They walked through the cathedral doors, into the morning, into the light. The convoy was there, 28 vehicles in the matte dark navy of the Imperial fleet, each one with the Kostovian eagle in gold on the rear panel, arranged along the block in the formation that had been arrived at and would depart in. The guards who had been in position at the vehicles were already moving to their entry position. She stood with her grandfather on the steps of the Cathedral of St. Meredith for a moment. She breathed the October air, which was the specific, cold, clear air of New England in autumn, the air that had been the air of the 3 years she had built. She breathed it. Her grandfather said, in the language of the Empire, "The dress is beautiful," she said. "I chose it myself." He said, "I know." He said it in the way that he said things when he meant more than the words contained. He had always been like this, the compression of a great deal into the minimum necessary syllable, which was the grammar of a man who had governed for 44 years and had learned that the weight of words is inversely proportional to their number when the speaker knows what they are saying. She said, "I'm ready to come home, grandfather." He looked at her. The specific, particular look of 81 years and 44 of governing, and the loss of his daughter, and the raising of his granddaughter, and the winter evening in the library when he had said, "Go," and she had said, "I will come back." The look that contained all of it. He said, "Home has been ready for you." They walked to the car. The door opened. They got in. The convoy moved. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of the morning organized themselves with the efficient inevitability of consequences that have been prepared by people who know what they are doing. The Commercial Commission's clawback process was administered through the mechanisms that such processes use: legal correspondence, regulatory notification, the specific procedural language of institutions that have been doing this for a long time and do not find it difficult. Ashmore Properties, whose debt structure had been constructed with the joint venture income as a structural element, found the withdrawal of that income produced a cascading effect that its CFO described to the board in a meeting 2 weeks after the wedding as existential. The 14 companies that had been notified of the conduct finding made their individual business decisions, and the decisions in 12 of the 14 cases were the decisions you make when you have been given information about a counterparty's conduct that changes your assessment of the counterpart. Carter Ashmore filed for a restructuring of the company's debt within 40 days of the wedding morning. The restructuring was managed by a firm that specialized in distressed assets, which was a category that Ashmore Properties had not previously occupied and occupied now, with the specific, disorienting quality of an institution discovering that the category it is in is permanent rather than temporary. Margaret Ashmore retained a legal team that attempted to challenge the Commercial Commission's jurisdiction. The challenge was reviewed by the relevant arbitration body, which found the jurisdiction established and the conduct findings supported by documentary evidence, and dismissed the challenge within 3 weeks of its filing. Elena Alexandra returned to Kostovia. She returned with the specific, full-bodied quality of a person returning to something that has always been theirs and that they now occupy with complete conviction because they have gone away and come back and know from the coming back that the belonging is real. She sat at the council table where her grandfather had been sitting for 44 years, and she understood, for the first time without ambivalence, that the table was going to be hers, and that she was ready for the table, and that the 3 years had been the preparation she had needed for the readiness. She would tell the story, eventually, to the people who earned it, that she had left to find out whether she existed outside the institution, and had found that she did, and had found something else too. That existing outside the institution had made her capable of understanding the institution from the inside in a way she could not have understood it without going outside it. She would tell this to young women who were in the position she had been in, who were navigating the weight of what they were born to and trying to understand whether what they were was real outside its context. True power, she would say, does not require the context to be real. It exists in a classroom in New Haven. It exists in the patience of 3 years and 11 months of watching someone reveal themselves without rushing the revelation. It exists in the specific, unhurried act of tying an apron over a wedding dress in a cathedral while 300 people watch, and being entirely still and knowing, with the complete, bone-deep certainty of someone who has arranged for what is coming, that the stillness is the most powerful thing in the room. And if you watched Elena tie that apron and felt, in that moment, the specific quality of a patience about to become thunder, if you want more of what happened when the emperor kissed his granddaughter's hand in a wedding cathedral in Connecticut and the world rearranged itself around the truth, then smash that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to this channel, because the stories of women who knew exactly what they were carrying, even when no one in the room had been allowed to see it, never stop, and they are always, always worth the wait.